Hello, and welcome to week 8, day 1 of the Bible in a Year Live Chronological Project. This week we're reading from the Message version. We're still reading through Leviticus, and today we'll read Leviticus chapters 14 and 15. Every Sunday evening at 6:30 p.m. on Zoom, we gather just to discuss the week's readings. So feel free to join us. You can find the link in the description or on our website. Let's dig in. God spoke to Moses. These are the instructions for the infected person at the time of his cleansing. First, bring him to the priest. The priest will take him outside the camp and make an examination. If the infected person has been healed of the serious skin disease, the priest will order 2 live, clean birds, some cedar wood, scarlet thread, and hyssop to be brought for the one to be cleansed. The priest will order him to kill one of the birds over fresh water in a clay pot. The priest will then take the live bird with the cedar wood, the scarlet thread, and the hyssop, and dip them in the blood of the dead bird over fresh water, and then sprinkle the person being cleansed from the serious skin disease 7 times and pronounce him clean. Finally, he will release the live bird in the open field. The cleansed person, after washing his clothes, shaving off all his hair, and bathing with water, is clean. Afterwards, he may again enter the camp, but he has to live outside his tent for 7 days. On the 7th day, he must shave off all his hair from his head, beard, eyebrows, all of it. He then must wash his clothes and bathe all over with water. He will be clean. The next day, the 8th day, he will bring 2 lambs without defect and a yearling ewe without defect, along with roughly 6 quarts of fine flour mixed with oil. The priest who pronounces him clean will place him and the material for his offering in the presence of God at the entrance of the tent of meeting. The priest will take one of the lambs and present it and the pint of oil as a compensation offering and lift them up as a wave offering before the Lord. He will slaughter the lamb in the place where the absolution offering and the whole burnt offering are slaughtered, in the holy place, because, like the absolution offering, the compensation offering belongs to the priests. It is most holy. The priest will now take some of the blood of the compensation offering and put it on the right lobe of the man being cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. Following that, he will take some oil and pour it into the palm of his left hand, and then with the finger of his right hand sprinkle oil 7 times before God. The priest will put some of the remaining oil on the right lobe of the one being cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, placing it on top of the blood of the compensation offering. He will put the rest of the oil on the head of the man being cleansed and make atonement for him before God. Finally, the priest will sacrifice the absolution offering and make atonement for the one to be cleansed from his uncleanness. Slaughter the whole burnt offering and offer it with the grain offering on the altar. He has made atonement for him. He is clean. If he is poor and cannot afford these offerings, he will bring 1 male lamb as a compensation offering to be offered as a wave offering to make atonement for him, and with it a couple of quarts of fine flour mixed with oil for a grain offering, a pint of oil, and 2 doves or pigeons, which he can afford, one for an absolution offering and the other for a whole burnt offering. On the 8th day, he will bring them to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting before the presence of God. The priest will take the lamb for the compensation offering together with the pint of oil and wave them before the Lord as a wave offering. He will slaughter the lamb for the compensation offering, take some of its blood, and put it on the lobe of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. The priest will pour some of the oil into the palm of his left hand, and with his right finger sprinkle some of the oil from his palm 7 times before God. He will put some of the oil that is in his palm on the same places he put the blood of the compensation offering, and on the lobe of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. The priest will take what is left of the oil in his palm and put it on the head of the one to be cleansed, making atonement for him before God. At last, he will sacrifice the doves or pigeons which are within his means, one as an absolution offering and the other as a whole burnt offering, along with the grain offering. Following this procedure, the priest will make atonement for the one to be cleansed before God. These are the instructions to be followed for anyone who has a serious skin disease and cannot afford regular offerings for his cleansing. God spoke to Moses and Aaron. When you enter the land of Canaan, which I am giving to you as a possession, and I put a serious fungus in a house in the land of your possession, the householder is to go and tell the priest, I have some kind of fungus in my house. The priest is to order the house vacated until he can come to examine the fungus, so that nothing in the house is declared unclean. When the priest comes and examines the house, if the fungus on the wall of the house has greenish or rusty swelling that appears to go deeper than the surface of the wall, the priest is to walk out of the door, shut the house up for 7 days. On the 7th day, he is to come back and conduct another examination. If the fungus has spread in the walls of the house, he is to order that the stones affected by the fungus be torn out and thrown in a garbage dump outside the city. He is to make sure the entire inside of the house is scraped and the plaster that is removed be taken away to the garbage dump outside the city. Then he is to replace the stones and replaster the house. If the fungus breaks out again in the house after the stones have been torn down and the house has been scraped and plastered, the priest is to come and conduct an examination. If the fungus has spread, it is a malignant fungus. The house is unclean. The house has to be demolished. Its stones, wood, and plaster are to be removed to the garbage dump outside the city. Anyone who enters the house while it is closed up is unclean until evening. Anyone who sleeps or eats in the house must wash his clothes. But if when the priest comes and conducts his examination, he finds that the fungus has not spread after the house has been replastered, the priest is to declare that the house is clean and the fungus is cured. He then is to purify the house by taking 2 birds, some cedar wood, scarlet thread, and hyssop. He will slaughter 1 bird over fresh water in a clay pot. Then he will take the cedar wood, the hyssop, the scarlet thread, and the living bird, dip them in the blood of the killed bird and the fresh water, and sprinkle the house 7 times, cleansing the house with the blood of the bird, the fresh water, the living bird, the cedar wood, the hyssop, and the scarlet thread. Last of all, he will let the living bird loose outside the city in the open field. He has made atonement for the house is clean. These are the procedures to be followed for every kind of serious skin disease or itch, for mildew or fungus on clothing or in a house, and for a swelling or blister or shiny spot in order to determine when it is unclean and when it is clean. These are the procedures regarding infectious skin diseases and mildew and fungus. Leviticus 15, bodily discharge. God spoke to Moses and Aaron. Speak to the people of Israel. Tell them, when a man has a discharge from his genitals, the discharge is unclean. Whether it comes from a seepage or an obstruction, he is unclean. He is unclean all the days his body has a seepage or an obstruction. Every bed on which he lies is ritually unclean. Everything on which he sits is unclean. If someone touches his bed or sits on anything he sat on, or touches the man with the discharge, he has to wash his clothes and bathe in water. He remains unclean until evening. If the man with the discharge spits on someone who is clean, that person has to wash his clothes and bathe in water. He remains unclean until evening. Every saddle on which the man with the discharge rides is unclean. Whoever touches anything that has been under him becomes unclean until evening. Anyone who carries such an object must wash his clothes and bathe with water. He remains unclean until evening. If the one with the discharge touches someone without first rinsing his hands with water, the one touched must wash his clothes and bathe with water. He remains unclean until evening. If a pottery container is touched by someone with a discharge, you must break it. A wooden article is to be rinsed with water. When a person with a discharge is cleansed from it, he is to count off 7 days for his cleansing, wash his clothes, and bathe in running water. Then he is clean. On the 8th day, he is to take 2 doves or 2 pigeons and come before God at the entrance of the tent of meeting and give them to the priest. The priest then offers one as an absolution offering and one as a whole burnt offering and makes atonement for him in the presence of God because of his discharge. When a man has an emission of semen, he must bathe his entire body in water. He remains unclean until evening. Every piece of clothing and everything made of leather which gets semen on it must be washed with water. It remains unclean until evening. When a man sleeps with a woman and has an emission of semen, both are to wash in water. They remain unclean until evening. When a woman has a discharge of blood, the impurity of her menstrual period lasts 7 days. Anyone who touches her is unclean until evening. Everything on which she lies or sits during the period is unclean. Anyone who touches her bed or anything on which she sits must wash his clothes and bathe in water. He remains unclean until evening. If a man sleeps with her and her menstrual blood gets on him, he is unclean for 7 days, and every bed on which he lies becomes unclean. If a woman has a discharge of blood for many days, but not at the time of her monthly period, or has a discharge that continues beyond the time of her period, she is unclean the same day as during the time of her period. Every bed on which she lies during the time of the discharge, and everything on which she sits becomes unclean the same as in her monthly period. Anyone who touches these things becomes unclean and must wash his clothes and bathe in water. He remains unclean until evening. When she is cleansed from her discharge, she is to count off 7 days. Then she is clean. On the 8th day, she is to take 2 doves or 2 pigeons and bring them to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting. The priest will offer one for an absolution offering and the other for a whole burnt offering. The priest will make atonement for her in the presence of God because of the discharge that made her unclean. You are responsible for keeping the people of Israel separate from that which makes them ritually unclean, lest they die in their unclean condition by defiling my dwelling, which is among them. These are the procedures to follow for a man with a discharge or an emission of semen that makes him unclean, and for a woman in her menstrual period, any man or woman with a discharge, also for a man who sleeps with a woman who is unclean. This is the word of the Lord. Amen.